Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took over, and he inherited a developing crisis in the East, Vietnam. Back in the 50s, the Vietnamese had kicked their French colonizers out once and for all, and the country was divided into two. In the north, a communist regime, and in the south, an anti-communist.
No, it wasn't divided into two. Nobody liked the anti-communist regime in the South. It was U.S.-backed and armed right-wingers who nobody supported, which is why the U.S. had to go and do Vietnam. And then after the U.S. left Vietnam, still nobody supported these people, and they chased them out literally as the U.S. was leaving. The Vietnamese chased out the U.S. puppet government in Saigon.
Regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Vietnam under their own regime. So the North established the national...
It's the same thing what they did with Korea. You don't get to say that Kim Il-sung and Ho Chi Minh were evil, ruthless dictators because they wanted to reunite their country when you occupied half their country. If Russia came and occupied half the United States, killed millions of our people, and started stealing all our resources and backing fascist right-wing groups in the United States, and then somebody from the West or from the other half of the United States that wasn't occupied by Russia said, hey, we should take our own land back, that's not being a ruthless dictator. That's called defending your country from imperialism and imperialist aggression, which is what Ho Chi Minh did, and it's incredibly inspiring. And the U.S. Did horrific amounts of damage in Vietnam, left so many dead and so much trauma, destroyed the infrastructure of Vietnam, made a very easy transition into socialism, a very difficult transition into socialism by bombing all their agriculture and industry and getting their soil filled with Agent Orange and napalm and all these other toxic chemicals. And then Ho Chi Minh fights against that, and that makes him a ruthless dictator. Shut the hell up. Shut the hell up. You're an idiot. You're a chauvinist idiot. Whoever made this video.
National Liberation Front, also known as the Viet Cong, to carry out a campaign of guerrilla warfare in the South with Soviet support. The U.S. sent advisors to help train the South Vietnamese to deal with the threat, but President Diem's brutal policies pushed more and more South Vietnamese to support the Viet Cong. And over the next decade, the situation escalated.
More and more South Vietnamese supported the Viet. They always supported the Viet Minh. It's not the Viet Cong. That's literally a pejorative that the U.S. military came up with to call these people when they were there trying to massacre them and occupy their country. Started calling them the Kongs when it's actually the Viet Minh. And the South never had any support. You know, they never had any real grassroots support, the same way South Korea never had any grassroots support, which is why the U.S. eventually ended up doing wars in both places. It's literally the exact same as Korea, where everybody was like, no, we support Ho Chi Minh. We don't support the U.S.-backed fascist groups or occupied Vietnam. So they started liberating their own country, and that's when the U.S. started bombing everybody. But apparently Ho Chi Minh's the dictator for that. Not Henry Kissinger and the evil pieces of garbage who leveled a huge percentage of Vietnam and Korea with bombs because they wanted their independence.
To a breaking point, America feared the domino effect. That is, if South Vietnam fell to communism, would Cambodia be next? Then Laos? Thailand? Burma? India? LBJ had to make a choice between losing South Vietnam or sending in the troops. And so in they went. From 1965, America found its...
Losing South Vietnam. America had to send in the troops or we would lose South Vietnam. What do you mean lose it? It's not fucking ours. It's Vietnam. It literally, it's in the name. Vietnam. It belongs to the Vietnamese. What do you mean we had to send in troops or we would lose it? First of all, you just said South Vietnam was its own independent thing. You know, it wasn't an artificial government propped up by the U.S. and U.S. intelligence agencies, which it was. But then you say that, you know, once the North came into the South, that's when the U.S. was forced to send their troops. Otherwise, we would lose South Vietnam. I thought it wasn't ours. I thought it was just South Vietnam. And why does the U.S. have the right to invade countries or we might lose them? What do you mean by that? I mean, I know this is propaganda, and whoever came up with this probably knows what they're doing, right? They probably know that they're creating propaganda. But how, as a normal person, could you, read the script of this and be like, this is, and not be like, this is ridiculous. This is the most ridiculous shit I've ever read. the US needed to invade Vietnam or they would lose South Vietnam. It's not ours. It's Vietnam. Again, using the same example, if Vietnam took over half the United States and then the half that wasn't took over said we should go get the rest of the United States back, get the rest of our territory back, would the US media portray them as evil dictators for doing that? Would they say Vietnam needed to send in their troops at that point in order to get the eastern United States back? No, no country even thinks like that or would suggest such a ludicrous thing, because no country thinks like the United States. No country is as arrogant as the U.S. empire and thinks that, you know, you can invade countries and destroy their infrastructure and agriculture and bomb children and blow up their schools, as long as it lets you keep half the country for yourself because it's ours. Yeah, we're the U.S. We can take every country we want. No.
Itself in a war unlike anything it had ever fought before. Let's play Spot the Viet Cong Soldier. Did you see him? Of course not. That's because millions of young American men were drafted and sent to fight a ruthless enemy who used the thick jungle as its shield. It was nearly impossible to tell where the enemy was, or worse, who it was. And as a result, the civilian population got caught up in the brutal crossfire. The city of Saigon found itself under regular attack, and America launched a bombing campaign in the north during Operation Rolling Thunder.
That's what you call the crossfire. You call Operation Rolling Thunder crossfire. The U.S. invaded their country, occupied the South, and then started bombing the shit out of the North the same way that they did to North Korea, dropping tons and tons of Agent Orange and napalm, leaving the country toxic and leaving their farmland toxic for years, making it extremely difficult for them to grow food even after the U.S. left. That's civilians getting caught in the crossfire? No. And if you learn about Vietnam specifically, the tactics of the Viet Minh were so good, the guerrilla warfare tactics, because they understood the jungle and they understood their own homeland. The Americans eventually didn't know what to do, and they were scared all the time that they were going to get ambushed or whatever else. So they just started bombing and lighting on fire like vast swaths of jungle, right? And there are tons of examples of U.S. just blatant massacres of women and children in Vietnam, probably because, you know, they didn't know who they were fighting, right? A lot of times people would dress as women and children, but then they would be soldiers and they would attack the U.S. You want to know why? Because the U.S. was invading and occupying their country. So they knew how their country worked. They knew where to hide. They knew how to do military operations. And the U.S. just kept drafting young people and sending them to go fight and die in this death trap. And then we bomb millions of acres of farmland and kill countless numbers of people in the north in Operation Rolling Thunder. And this propaganda nonsense is like, oh, that's just people getting caught in the crossfire. No, that's people being directly targeted. People's land and territory and political system being directly targeted for takeover by the U.S. empire. And then the U.S. empire killing as many young American people, young American soldiers drafted into the military as they need to, and killing as many people in Vietnam as they need to, and destroying as much of Vietnam's economy as they need to in order to do it, in order to take this place over. That's what this is. It's not crossfire between two equal sides. It is the imperialist slaughter of the heroic Viet Minh people who defeated the U.S. and maintained their economic and political sovereignty. That's what the Vietnam War was.
The Viet Cong used the Ho Chi Minh Trail running through Laos and Cambodia to supply the campaign. It was a long and brutal war, and I could never do it justice in this video. But in terms of the Cold War, Vietnam was probably the biggest of many, many global conflicts that signaled a turning point. Under the